All right. Welcoming to Simplifying SQL Development with the SQL Developer Bundle. My name is Stuart Ainsworth. I am a manager of database administration for a company located out of Monette, Missouri. I work from home 100% of the time. We've got a couple of local offices, but I manage a couple of operations in the area. Gladiator Technologies, the name of the company, is trying to take it out of this lot. But what we do is we manage security information for community banks and small credit unions. Former data architect. That's probably where I got most of this experience, is working with on the development side of the house, helping design models and figure out ways to do things. And I have a prior experience before that as a true DBA and reporting database development. I'm also chapter leader of Atlanta, India. So that's why I give them a shout out. And I've been a friend of Redgate since 2009. Basically, the Friend program is Redgate's product evangelism program. It's just a way that for guys like me who like to go out and talk about this sort of stuff, we get hands-on with their tools and give them feedback and give them opportunities, and occasionally call us up to do things like this. So it's a neat company. Obviously, you guys know that, or you would be here with Red, the whole thing. So, going to dive right into this. And I did mention that this is a demo presentation, which means it is going to blow up. I have no doubt about it. I'm going to do something that is going to break horrifically. And I'm just trying to set the expectation right there. You know, no fireworks other than perhaps the computer lighting on fire. So, hopefully no one will die. Haven't had that happen yet, but I've always felt like I need to put that disclosure in there somewhere. And hopefully you guys will ask questions. I mean, there's a little bit of a ramp up to talking about the tools, but once we get into the tools, you can ask me questions. Just remember the legitimate answer is going to be, I don't know. And I may tell you that, but we'll poke around and see if we can figure it out. So, how many of you guys use the Redgate Development Suite? Any piece of it? Okay, what pieces? What are you guys working with? What are some, how about you?
I've got the whole bundle.
Whole bundle?
I haven't used all of it yet. It's only been a couple of months.
Okay. Anybody else? What else?
Compare.
Compare. Okay. SQL Prompt. Any SQL Prompt people? Prompt is like my favorite tool. You're going to see a lot of it in this. It has changed my life dramatically because I also do a little bit of consulting on the side. And when you do consulting on the side, every minute counts. And so when it's suddenly your time is equal to real money as opposed to your employer's money, boy, you start finding ways to shortcut things. So some of the diving into this and some of the challenges that we're going to talk about is from a historical background. When you talk about developing SQL databases, et cetera, you know, relational design has been around since the early 70s. It's a very I guess the classy way to say it is SQL is a very mature technology, right? I mean, this is something that even though we've enhanced it and gone back and set new ANSI standards and new products have come out and new variations of the product, I mean, the language itself essentially hasn't changed for 40 plus years now. And so it's a little difficult to do because minor evolution, whenever you start dealing with trying to come with development standards that fit it, the evolution of the product has evolved around variations by who wrote the pieces of code. In other words, Oracle's development suite is very different from Microsoft's development suite, is very different from MySQL's development suite. There may be some similar things you can do, but at a conceptual level, the ability and the functionality that you can do depends a lot on what kind of product you've got installed as your database. So that's a challenge. The basic premise of SQL, though, is that you're going to enhance performance and validity through normalization. Either you're dealing with first through fifth normal form, or you're dealing with star schemas. The whole idea is that you're trying to reduce the size of the footprint of your data through some mechanism of data modeling. Everybody with me so far? Okay. This is the thinking stuff. Having said that, when you develop, most of us have to develop on a sample of data or less expensive hardware than we've got in operations. It's very difficult for me to say, it's going to take a SAN with 32 cores for each node in the cluster, a 3-cluster server that we're going to have to run operations. And oh yeah, I need the exact same setup for my development environment so that we can test everything. So what ends up happening is they go, well, here's a laptop with 4 gig of RAM, and you know, go for it. So it can lead to a performance discrepancy, obviously, because depending on the volume of data that you're managing and the hardware that you're working with, when you try to move out of an operational environment into your development environment, you have a tough time dealing with these sorts of performance challenges. And it's usually resolved by post-hoc development, is what I call this. But what post-hoc development is, it's that thing that shall not be named developing on the production servers. And I freely admit that we make changes on our production servers without going through development. And I know that many of you do too as well. And it's a big taboo, right? Everything is supposed to go through development. But the problem goes back, you know, stuff performs differently in an operational environment than it does when we were originally envisioning how it was going to work. So the changes that you're dealing with can be as simple as index maintenance or SQL refactoring. Or, you know, so you could be just saying, oh, we need a new index, so we need to put that index out there on the server, because development didn't account for the fact that the data was going to be distributed this way. It could be the fact that you have to totally rewrite the stored procedure because as you probably know, there's 15 different ways to do something in SQL, and development chose the way that wasn't optimal because it was good for them. And we'll talk a little bit about why things are good for them. Going too fast? Too slow? This leads me to believe that lots of SQL development is done in the same environment as the administrative tasks. That's another big leap of faith that I'm going to take. How many of you use Visual Studio for your SQL development? Okay, very few of you. How many of you use Management Studio for your SQL development? All right, there you go. I mean, you sling SQL in the tool that you're used to working with. And if you're, and I guess a big question I should have asked, how many of you consider yourselves DBAs? Okay, and the rest of you consider yourselves developers? See, that's even, you know, I mean, a lot of it, Microsoft's big push has been to get stuff into Visual Studio, right? And, or use the SQL Server data tools, which is kind of a subset of Visual Studio that blends with Management Studio. But the whole point of the fact is that if you're slinging SQL for SQL Server, you're using Management Studio. And what this has led me to think about when I think about this is that if you look at a classical application architecture, or layered architecture, and this is just one model, there are several, you got all this stuff occurring in a development environment, and you got this stuff occurring in a development environment, right? So if you're one of those guys, how many of you write both SQL and some other language? In other words, you'll do, yeah, so what are you doing? You switching from one ID to another? Yeah. So if you're working in Visual Studio, you're used to having all kinds of stuff to help you maintain your code. And when you go into SQL Server Management Studio, you got nothing. But you've got other stuff. We'll talk about the other stuff. Life is a balance, right? You know, you got a balance between performance and maintenance. Visual Studio, very heavily tilted toward maintenance of code. Not that you can't, not that you're not supposed to write performance code in Visual Studio, but the idea is that the tool itself is engineered to help you maintain your code base. Maintenance is good in a development cycle because the idea is that when you have a bunch of developers working on a problem, you're supposed to, I think Steve said in his example this morning, or maybe Steve or somebody else, but you're supposed to have 9 people getting gains from 7 people's work, right? I mean, the whole idea is that it's exponential. And the reason it's exponential is because you've got all these maintenance tools built into your IDE. Robust IntelliSense, tie integration with source control, you can hook into automatic builds, object-oriented processing templates, you got all this stuff. It makes it very easy for you to write code. On the other side of the fence, Management Studio, it's very heavily tilted toward performance analysis, visual execution plans, database object exploration, performance stats, database tuning advisor. All of these things are baked into Management Studio that if you're building a database inside of Visual Studio, you don't really have access to them. Now there's hacks and workarounds that you can do for everything, but the idea is that for database people, if somebody were to ask you, you know, I want you to write a store procedure, what's the first level of evaluation that people ask you? You know, or hey, this store procedure is not working right. What do they mean by that? It's slow. You know, it's either returning incorrect results or it's slow. Nobody ever says, can you write that in such a way so that the next guy can, you know, fix it for us? They don't care. Management doesn't care. They want us to focus on, as DBAs, database developers, make this faster. Because, you know, if the application guys ever say, well, why is the application not working right? Or why is the application slow? They all go, it's the database. 90% of the time it's the database. So our job as database developers and database administrators is to make our databases run really, really fast so that we can blame the application developers for crappy code. Sorry, application developers. So, we throw you under the bus. So how does Microsoft talk about SQL development? What's the big push that they're pushing us toward, and et cetera? Well, they've tried it a couple of different times, and there's actually several different valid approaches that you can work if you want to work with tools that do maintenance inside the Microsoft suite. You can work with Visual Studio database projects. How many of you use those? Clunky. They're just kind of a pain in the butt to make work right. They have limited maintainability. In other words, IntelliSense doesn't work great in them. There's not really any sort of templates. They're great for deployment and versioning because you can build automatically a solution that's got a database project baked into it. But there's zero performance tools, right? You know, you're just writing queries based off what you think, and most people are cutting and pasting those queries into Management Studio and then cutting and pasting them back into your database project. SQL Server database tools. This was Data Dude was the first version of it, and then they renamed it to something a little more efficient sounding. Better maintainability, great deployment and versioning. Some performance tools, there's stuff that's baked into SSDT. I don't get the whole left side, right side thing, you know, and that was, you know, if you go and talk to the Microsofties about, so that may be pejorative, I don't know, but if you go talk to the people from Microsoft about it and they talk about, oh yeah, you've got the left side and the right side. The right side is for development, the left side is for administration. And it's really, they've just taken database projects and just kind of crammed it into Management Studio and made it work. It's a step forward. I think it's a little better than the whole Visual Studio database projects, but for me that's grown up slinging SQL, I don't get it. Maybe some newer developers that are there that might understand it. This is what's coming next. How many of you work with Entity Framework? Okay, very few of you. How many of you are afraid of Entity Framework? It is really, if you are a database administrator, you need to learn about Entity Framework because this is what's coming. And the idea is that basically most SQL development will be done without writing SQL. You're going to let the tool write it for you. And you're going to see more and more of this in the wild because this is really the big push. It's very attractive as an application developer. I see people shaking their heads, but as an application developer, it's very attractive not to have to learn another language. They can just begin working with the objects and let the tool do it itself. Talking with some friends of mine, and I saw the power of what they could do. I thought, well, yeah, that's great. And then I thought about all the people that I've seen misuse tools like this before, and shudder because the SQL that it writes is the SQL that a computer will write. And computers can get things wrong very fast. You know, they can get things right with some guidance, but they can get things wrong really fast. And so the whole ORM, that's one of the big fears, is it can be overused. However, excellent maintainability. It's very easy because you're just working with objects inside in Visual Studio. Great deployment and versioning. No real performance tools. You might use another third-party tool to see how the whole application is factoring. You could monitor those sorts of things. But the whole big solution is, you know, just throw more hardware at it. I mean, servers are cheap, and servers are getting cheaper, and it becomes really easy to overcome a lot of coding issues with bigger hardware. You can just eliminate a lot of it, or just hide it, I guess is the way to think of it. So now we come to the Redgate products. And one of the reasons that I'm a big fan of these is that they're really developed to work within Management Studio. It's a format that I'm familiar with. Once you start using the products, they're very easy. They're in fact so simple that sometimes you overlook at some of the advanced stuff that they can do. But they really begin to narrow the gap between developing in a performance-oriented IDE and a maintenance-oriented IDE. You get maintainability, deployment, and versioning, and you still have all your performance tools. I can run all of my queries and test them and test the performance plans and build my indexes and do all of this sort of stuff, and then have the benefit of having maintainable, deployable, and versioned code. Everybody with me? Okay. So now onto the demos. This is where stuff breaks. SQL Search, how many of you use this product? Oh yeah, this is like a no-brainer. If you do not have this on your systems, go get it now. Now, it probably cracks up the Redgate people in the room because it's totally free and they're making no revenue off of this whatsoever. And it's also one of these things that has been slated to be inclusion for SQL Prompt, but I don't think it is yet, right? So that was a warning I read somewhere. So, but really, it's one of these tools that is so dumb, so easy to use. It's just, I guess, simple. I shouldn't say the word dumb, but what do I know? Of course, I got to connect to, see, I'm on the spot. Feeling, my face turned flush. New query. All right, so connect Explorer. There we go. So if I go into SQL Search, and I'm connected to the server running on my local laptop, I've got a couple of versions of AdventureWorks going on there. If you want to search for something as simple as human resources, notice that as I begin typing, stuff just pops up, right? So if you know the name of something that you want to look for, it's very easy. You can just start popping it up. You can see that I've got a couple of different versions of the database out there, AdventureWorks 2012, etc. You can do a search across all databases. So if you know somewhere out there I've got stuff named human, it'll let you find it. You can, it'll identify the different kinds of objects. We're only looking for stored procedures. Those are all my stored procedures. The nice thing is it begins to highlight inside what you're looking for. This becomes a real easy tool to begin to find places. Now, things that you can do, select star, which we all know is a bad coding practice. But now by doing an exact match, I got a list of places that I've got select star actually out there, like on the report server. Which, you know, but you can see that I've got a store procedure out there that I use select star in. I've got, you know, a couple of functions, a couple of views. How many of you have done like searches in sys comments? I guess now it's sys modules is what you really should be using. It's a little clunky, right? You can get this same sort of information by writing some sort of script like this, and it'll go back and find, you know, the various types, and so you can roll through and say, oh yeah, this is where I use star. The problem is things like this sort of search, in order, if I do select star, it's not going to pick up everything, those couple of views that I wrote, because the views that I wrote use tabs instead of spaces. So, you know, the display of the information is not necessarily the same as what's actually being stored. So, right away, you can begin to see that a simple tool like SQL Search allows you to do some flexibility and some things without having to resort to a lot of scripts. And I know DBAs, we love scripts and we love to do what we need to do, but etc. So, everybody clear? I mean, again, this is a product that you don't have, go get it. Totally free, makes it very easy to use. Yes?
So you say that if you're searching for select star, it'll find select tab star?
Yes.
Okay.
So, like, in other words, see, it picked up my V address view that I had written select star, but here, the actual SQL command that it's writing doesn't pick up on it. Now, if I take out the select part of it and just do star, there's the address right there. So it's smart enough to know. I don't know how, but it just knows. So, and the good part about it is I don't have to think about it. I don't have to understand how it works. I just know that I need to go find this store procedure. Let me go do it. So, all right. Let's see. I wrote up a little thing. Not that one. Here, I'll use magic. I'll talk about tab history in just a second. So, SQL Prompt. How many of you guys use this tool? How many of you don't use this tool? How many of you never heard of this tool? Okay. What SQL Prompt is like IntelliSense for SQL Server, basically. But there's a whole bunch of other goodies that are kind of baked into it. What I'm going to show you is, for example, if I start select top 100 star from address, see, it already knew that I had just one table and in-person address. It aliased it for me. We'll talk about the formatting, etc. Do tab, I suddenly get my entire column list out there. But notice all of the keystrokes are just really simple and easy to do. It's just out there. You can do things like snippets, ST100, tab, select, and so it's already written the select top 100 star for me. If you do SSF, select star from tables. So it's, I mean, think of all the keystrokes that you're saving just by doing that. And those keystrokes don't add up to much, but it's just like performance tuning the query, right? You know, you take milliseconds here, milliseconds there, and eventually you add up a whole bunch of them that you save just by using the tool. I'm talking about snippets. The nice thing about snippets are things that you can do like W2, which is exact SP2. You can manage the snippets, so you can write your own. So you create your own snippets. The snippet files themselves are stored in a directory that if you go to that directory, you could actually share that directory using a tool like Dropbox or I forget what the Windows Sync, is it called Windows Sync Center these days? But SkyDrive will do it. Any of these sorts of these shared repositories. So if you want to come up with a consistent set of snippets that your whole team uses, you can set up a kind of a repository where they'll write it from your local drive to the shared drive, and then their shared drives will push it to their local drives. So it becomes a real easy way to start getting to that coding standard. Because if you're using the same keystrokes and the same sort of snippets to get to somewhere, it's easy to do. How many of you have very complicated OLTP databases? And by that I mean when you're writing a query to find out a little piece of information, you have to join more than 2 or 3 tables, sometimes 5. Worst case I've ever seen is 15. You know, because you need to get a piece from here, and then you get there. The beauty of this is you could just write a whole from clause with all of your joins in there, and give it a snippet name. And then, you know, you don't have to keep writing that over and over and over again, even though the IntelliSense, of course, will help pop those up, etc. So, let's see. Oh, this is a cool one. Find invalid object. You guys know what an invalid object is? All right, an invalid object is a store procedure that is referencing, a store procedure review or a function that is referencing something that doesn't exist anymore, right? So it happens to the best of the development. You change the name of an object and you break stuff, right? Well, one of the neat little features inside of SQL Prompt is you can right click on a database. Oh, where was it? Find invalid objects. It's going to crawl my database, and it found my store procedure that is pointing to some invalid object. So if you've got a lot of these, it becomes very easy to highlight those, and then it gives you a to-do list to go and fix what you need to do. Any questions? I mean, okay. I'll just keep going. If you guys want me to stop and show something, I'll stop and show something. So, Formatting. Steve Jones, you know, what was it Steve that said this morning in his presentation that schema rules are stupid?
Style rules.
Style rules. Okay. So, but you know, speaking as a manager, sometimes management is stupid, and we all insist on style rules for whatever reason. One of the nice things about SQL Prompt is something I call SQL Slick, and I stole that from Tim Radney. You control KY, and it applies a formatting to your script that you've got in front of you. So it goes through and formats and moves stuff around wherever you want to do it. You can set the options, and you can save them as a style, and you've got a lot of flexibility here. Like case, I'm an uppercase guy. Any lowercase people here? Ban on you. I can't read your code anymore. I've gotten so bad that if the keywords are not in uppercase, I don't get it. You know, so I'm immediately throwing it over here so that I can format it into something that I can read. Grant and Steve talked about being comma differentiators, and you can set your comma wherever you want to, with your commas and your parentheses, tabs and wrapping, however many tabs. The nice thing of it is that you can save your style, and you can have multiple styles. So default is obviously what the system goes back to is the default, but you have your style, you can have an alternate style. And this alternate style you can see has got the commas at the end. My style has got the commas at the beginning. I'm a comma at the beginning, uppercase kind of person. So yeah. I need to get a t-shirt printed up that says that. Any questions about this? The nice thing is that you can go through and then find a, so if I go to store procedures, because these adventure work store procedures definitely do not use that same format. See, they've got it written out, just lists, right? And I like having all of my columns that I'm calling back on the same line, so I'm going to control KY, it formats it to where it's something that I can easily read up. You know, and the nice thing about it is your style is your style. You know, do whatever you need to do. It's all free. So, oh, SummerI Script. This is another little goodie. How many of you have ever used this feature before? It's totally like tucked away, but I love this thing. If you are working with a complicated procedure, and I'm not sure if this is complicated or not, I'll just grab it. It looks like it's got a CTE, got a select statement. But how many of you have procedures that got select statements and update statements? They return multiple data sets. They may do inserts and if clauses. Okay. What SummerI Script will do under the SQL Prompt menu is, then you can do Control B, Control S, which I'm not sure if the Control BS thing makes sense to guys from England, but we'll have to talk, guys. But it basically breaks your script down into the various components. If you had if statements, you would have them in here. You can click on them, and it'll highlight the segments of the code, and then you can go and edit it. So if you're crawling through a script and you know it's got a massive if clause, this is a great tool for kind of exploring this sort of stuff. And this is one of those things that is essential for DBAs as much as it is for developers, because in DBAs, we're always dealing with these scenarios where you've got an 8-mile-long store procedure and oh, one option of it is broken. Well, you have to crawl through it. You cut and paste out the segments, and you do. This lets you just kind of step through the code very quickly, very simply, very easily. So, all right, tab history. This is new as of SQL 6, and I'm still learning how to use it, but there's a lot of potential here. What tab history lets you do is it keeps kind of a running repository of the open tabs that you've had. So as you can see, as I highlight various, click on it, see I'm still learning how to use it. As I roll over and highlight, you can see the code segments that are in that individual tab. And you'll notice that a lot of these tabs are not even open on my machine. If I scroll down, I mean, there's tons of them out here that are completely not on a machine anymore. So it keeps a running total. How long? I don't know. I just know that for some period of time, it keeps more than enough tabs in there to keep me happy. You can search tabs. Let's see, I'm doing a lot of work with XML, so this is going to pull back all the tabs that I have that had XML in it. You can highlight a tab and rename the tab by right-clicking on it and say this tab. So for friendly purposes, so now I've got this tab. You can click over to Open Tabs and it'll just limit the features to the Open tab. Again, this is one of these really neat little things that you know, there's a lot of power and flexibility because, as you can see, when I start opening windows in SQL Server Management Studio, before I know it, I've got 50 or 100 windows open. And then I go through and start closing them all, and then I go, dang it, there's the one that I needed to keep open. And then, you know, you're kind of hosed because you didn't save the file. You know, I don't think anybody else has ever done that before. The nice thing is that it's really easy to just recreate that tab, and it'll throw it all right back up there. So, connection coloring. Yes?
Does it keep a history of, like, if you do a Control Z to go back or go by? If you reopen the tab, will it have the history of?
That's an excellent question. I am not sure. So in other words, if you were to save this history, I think it saves, well, like if I were to change this, like I've got a SQL query 2 right here, and then I'll just put an extra thing right there. And then if I go back into tab history, I think it's going to just keep, yeah. Like it doesn't keep SQL query 2. That I'm aware of. Now, one of the other Red Gate guys, you may want to ask them about that and see. I know I've heard some discussion about the possibility of using this as kind of a living source control system where it would do that. I don't know how that functionality works, and I haven't used it myself. But again, I guess SQL Prompt 6 came out, I guess a couple of months ago. So I really just only had a little while to kind of do it. And the thing again about most of the tools from Redgate is that they're so intuitive that you'll just start using them, and then you kind of forget about a lot of the little features that it can do for you because you're just used to doing the little rhythm things that are right there on the surface. And I'll be honest, I saw tab history pop up on the toolbar and I had no clue what it was and didn't have time to touch it until like a month ago. So, you know, this is one of those things that I'm still learning myself. But, where were we? I guess we used tab history to get there, but I didn't. Oh, connection coloring. Many of you ever use the custom connection coloring it's clunky. It doesn't work real well. Like I've had some things where the connection, and what this means is if you go into a registered server list, and you go to the properties, and go to the connection properties, you can use a custom color. So if you're working with multiple servers, say you've got a development, staging, and production, you could actually set the code there for the various server that you're going to connect to. The problem is it doesn't work real well. Yeah?
It's broken on 2005 and 2008. Microsoft acknowledges this.
Oh.
If you're in it'll only set the color when you connect. If you do a reconnection on that window, it will not update the color. 2012, they fixed it.
Well, it's still broken on my edition of 2012.
Okay. So all you do is fix in 2012.
Yeah, it is clunky as hell. I mean, it just does not work. Like I set it one time for a different server, and now all of my servers show up with the same custom color, no matter what I do. So I just kind of live with the fact that I have, you know, a red thing down at the bottom of my screen now because I don't know how to fix it. One of the nice things is that there's an experimental feature in SQL Prompt. Experiment. Query tab coloring. And you can enable it and use query tab coloring. And the nice thing about the query tab coloring is that you can set query tab coloring for servers. And they have a couple of defaults that you can use: production, development, testing, or staging. And what it does is it colors the tabs, not the bottom of the screen, which is really useful because they also do something smart like, oh, I don't know, highlight the color so that it's white on red instead of black on red. But it's really useful because now I can look at my screen and say if I connect to multiple servers, you know, if I have connection tab, then I say, oh, this tab is open on this server, this tab is open on this server. I should have loaded up another instance on this box that I could show you, but you go through and change the pretty colors that are associated with it. I, of course, am mildly colorblind, so this is supposed to be a different color, and I think on this projector, it actually is a different color for me. But on my laptop screen, it's the same. What is that testing that I just did? Connection color, you do development. And then I think they have a staging, which is blue. But again, the labels don't really mean anything to me. It just, you know, it is nice to be able to say, before I hit execute, what server am I on? Not that I've ever pushed a development change to production accidentally, but it happens, you know. And again, it's one of these nice little features that makes it easier for you to do. So, smart rename. This is another cool feature. Let's see, properties. Trying to find something. I should have picked a different one. And, oh yeah, well I know I've got some views built off of this. So I've got a table called person.address. And I know that I've got views that reference this table. And you decide you want to change the name of that table to be something else. What do you have to do? You change the name of it, and then you have to go through it. If you don't have Redgate SQL Prompt installed, what do you have to do? Yeah, you search everywhere that thing is, you know, you could use SQL Search and go and find it. But everywhere that table is referenced, you have to go and change it. Using Smart Rename, right click, Smart Rename, we're going to say person address new, next. It's going to roll through, and it's going to tell me all the changes that it's going to make to my database. You can hit View Script. These are all the steps that it would do if I hit execute. That's a lot. So I can go over to SQL Prompt and go to SummerI Script and say, oh, that's what it's going to do. But it'll step through and find every place that table is referenced in my database and go ahead and change the table to rename. So again, keystrokes. That's what it all comes down to, saving keystrokes. And I found serious ways to avoid doing anything. I'm not going to commit that change. The next one, split table. And this one, I haven't actually used it in our development environment, mostly because we're just that good. We just don't, no, but you know, it's one of those limited use cases that are out there. But if you're dealing with a table like Human Resources Department, and you wanted to split the table into different columns, we're going to create a secondary table called DPT. I'm going to move the department ID. Well, I'm going to copy the department ID over, and I'm going to move the group name over. All right, so you guys understand what I'm doing right here? Taking the table, had 4 columns. I'm going to copy the department ID over so that I have a one-to-one relationship between these two tables. And I'm going to move a various column over there. I hit next. It asks me where you want to create your foreign key. And we'll just accept the default for what it is. The column, any data in the columns will be lost. Oh, well, yeah, because you're going to drop that column, but hopefully you're going to move it over there before you do it. So we hit View Script. It gives me my script, and I crawl through and say, well, here's where I'm going to move my column. So it's generated the script to go ahead and do the split for me and do everything that I need to do. Everybody with me? So, and easy, right? Saving keystrokes. That's what it comes back down to. One of the things that I forgot to show earlier is that if you hover over an object, well, of course now I'm going to say it doesn't work really good. Come on. All right. Okay. Click. Oh, it's because it doesn't exist, that's why. But if I hover over the object, see, this is the part where the embarrassment strikes in. It gives you kind of a definition of what the object is. And if you click on it, it will generate the script for that object. So again, it gives you all kinds of little lookup capability in there to do it. You can then copy the script to, or do a summarization, etc. So, any questions? Click, right? Good? Awesome. All right, so that is, I've covered SQL Search, I've covered SQL Prompt pretty thoroughly. And again, SQL Prompt is like my favorite tool out of the Redgate family. It is the thing that I go to daily. The other tools, I may use them once a week or every other day, but SQL Prompt, anytime I'm opening up a window, it's there for me. It's my buddy. So, if you are doing a tool, if you want to do something like schema compare deploy, the tool that you're interested in is, we'll call this as target. There's a product called SQL Compare. And what SQL Compare lets you do, and this is just the plugin for Management Studio, is allows you to take two databases, or interestingly enough, when we get into source control, it'll let you take versions of databases, and you can actually compare them. How many of you were in Tim Radney's session this morning? I think you covered this, so you know he and I may have different bits and pieces. But it's just a diff tool. I mean, you basically get some options. There's a lot of options you can set in here. The behavior refers to the kind of script that you want to generate as a change script as a result of this. And the ignore options lets you ignore changes that are not relevant to what you want to do. If you don't care about things like the file group partition schemes where the data is actually located, you know, you can tell it to ignore it, and it just leaves them out in the comparison sort of tools. The one that I found this morning when we were talking about the style was there's an option that says you can ignore white space, right? And that's by default. So if I compare these databases right now, remember that I've gone through and reformatted a couple of store procedures and one of them, if I compare now, we're going to just run a little quick comparison. It's going to rip through all the databases. It's going to tell me right now that I've got just a few objects. We'll get about the highlighted stuff later. If you're doing source control and do migration scripts, you'll see these, and we'll talk about those in a minute. But the idea is that you can hover over you know, the differences and kind of scroll through and see where the actual differences lie. And note the little highlighting off to the side. That tells you basically lines where there's going to be issues, where you have the arrows, etc. So right here, if I scroll down, I'm going to bring up the fact that I have, you know, a change here. Right? Simple, straightforward. If I were, I'm going to go back and edit my project to say I'm going to look for white spaces this time. And I'm going to say that white space is now critically important because I do want to enforce style rules. And you see these two store procedures that I had to make changes in white space before. The content's the same, but you know, this tells me right here that we had some problems stylistically. So, any questions? Nice thing is that the way that it's set up right now, you can click on the arrow and woo. If I want to take the changes from server, I can do that, or if I want to take these changes, I can do that. You can select the individual changes you want to deploy. It'll tell you that there are some objects that are only in this database that are not in this database, and vice versa. And you can ultimately get to the point where when you put the deployment wizard, it gives you a couple of options. One is that you can create a deployment script and it'll open it right up in Management Studio for you. Or you can deploy using SQL Compare. And if I push this through, it's going to tell me the fact that I've got migration scripts. And again, we'll talk about migration scripts in a little bit. But if I skip over this part, it's generated the change script for me. And so you can see the script that I have that it's going to run. And if I hit, I can save the script, or if I hit deploy now, it'll push the changes out for me automatically. So, again, easy, simple, straightforward. Save keystrokes. Data Compare, no, I'm not going to save this. Data Compare is a similar project. Actually, I have slides. Why am I not using the slides? Okay, those are there. Data Compare is a diff tool for data. So you have SQL Compare, that's the diff tool for your schemas. Data Compare is the data tool, is the comparison tool for the data that is actually contained within those schemas. I write schemas must match, and realistically, you can do some mapping to make the schemas, pseudo schemas match and map up. I find that it's just easier if I'm dealing with, because if I'm going to deploy changes, I kind of want my databases to match anyway. So my general rule of thumb is go ahead and use SQL Compare to get your schemas up to the same speed, and then you can use Data Compare to get up to the same speed. I find it's most useful for lookup tools. It's not really an ETL tool. I have one of the clients that I consult with that I have used this tool to kind of get a deployment up in place. You know, deploying over the internet, if you're doing, it's real slow. If you're on a fast network, you might actually be able to get some pretty rapid speed to move data from place to place, but realistically, it's used for the development environment where you're just trying to get, you know, static values that you want to get from one location to the other. So, if I were to do, let's see, I'm going to go back and I'm going to go compare deploy with SQL Compare. I need to put a numbers table out there. I think I've already done it. Bear with me. So I'm going to put this numbers table. So I've pushed the numbers table over. It's a very simple numbers table. It just has a table of numbers and column. Now if I do a data compare between these two databases, because they both have a numbers table in them, data compare, set a source. And then I'm going to drag it over and just target, simple data compare. One of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to do the table names. And I'm going to say none. I have a numbers table. It's telling me that I don't have a key, but it's not set. So I have to go in and say, what key am I going to use? Well, since it's only one table, it's one column, it's pretty easy to figure out what the key is going to be. Now, if I compare just that one table, it's going to say I have 10,000 rows that exist in the source, but not in the target. If they were different, this center area would be highlighted. If it was in the target only, you'd have values here. And if you had some rows that were one but not in the other, it would, you'd see these all three of these columns populated. So everybody with me and understand? I mean, this is, again, straightforward, simple, easy to use. But you can begin to see the power of how quickly I was able to identify problems between two databases where data doesn't match, particularly if I already know what my lookup schemas are going to be. If I go to the deployment wizard and hit next, you can see that it's got the script in there. And what it did is it wrote out, 10,000 insert statements. One now. And so if I were to recompare, you can see that it's going to go back and tell me that I have, one table with identical rows. Okay? All right, now for the big daddy. You guys excited? You pumped? Source control. How many of you use source control? Okay. We are an interesting environment in that because I freely admit that we do development on our production servers when needed. What we have ended up doing is, and this is something we are still exploring and trying to work out all the kinks for, is that our development team has their own source control traditional branch. They have a development branch, or I guess it's trunk. I'm not a source control guy, so I don't know. They've got a development repository, they've got a staging repository, and they have a production repository. What we have done now is we're running SQL Source Control on our production servers pointed at the production repository. So if we have to make a change, we now push it to the source control repository so that as development is escalating their code through the process, they can see, hey, this is going to be changed and we're going to override it. And it at least gives kind of a red light, one of those last red lights to keep throwing something out onto the server that doesn't work. So, because we've made a change in the previous iteration of it, and we'll use that. Source control, and you know, the problem when you say the word SQL source control, everybody assumes that you're talking about, hey, you got a repository engine, and it's really not a repository engine. It's simply a connector. It connects to a variety of repository engines, including TFS, Subversion, Git. It is compatible with SQL Data Compare. We'll talk about that a little more. It's compatible with a product called SQL Connect. For those of you that are using Visual Studio to do your database development, what this allows you to do is to use either IDE, assuming that you've got SQL Connect and SQL Source Control, and they share the same format of the repository so that changes you make in one can be seen by the other. That was a big problem before. How many of you have ever worked with the TFS plugin in Management Studio? Okay. The solution file that gets written by the TFS or gets used by the TFS plugin is not the same solution file used for database project. Right? So if you've got people working on different things, it's very difficult for them to get the change. You all have to be on the same tool. The nice thing about this, about the SQL Connect and the SQL Source Control, is that because they're writing to the same structure, they're compatible with each other. So depending on which IDE your development team is most accustomed to working with, they can continue to use it. So, Source Control is a plugin for SMS, and it's an easy way to get into Source Control, but you need version management policies and history management policies. This is not a limitation of the tool. The tool is just simply designed to get my data in there. The policies that govern how your source control repositories are set up, those are controlled by the source control repository. In other words, if TFS says, hey, you got to have a comment every time you check something in, you know, source control doesn't manage that. But it will fail if you try to check something into TFS and you don't meet the validity rules. And it's because they've got things set up. So I kind of wanted to throw that in there because I think that a lot of people that are coming from the DBA background that may not be as familiar with how source control works, they just assume that the tool itself is going to do a lot of things for them. And in reality, it's just simply a connector of getting things from your database over there. So I've got a couple of databases that I've already set up, but I'm going to go ahead and go to other source control. I'm going to unlink these databases. So to get a database into source control, it's really easy. You right click on it, you highlight link database to source control. And it'll pop up on the screen giving you various options. It works with a lot of things as long as they support a certain command line interface. So even if you've got some other open source control, but how many of you are using TFS? Yeah, how many are using Subversion? Yeah, I usually find those are the ones that are covered. Git would be biggest. There's a couple. So, you know, those are probably the big three right there. I've got Subversion running on my laptop mainly because TFS requires a license and is expensive and a resource hog. But Subversion works great. And so I'm going to use, let's see, what is it called? Visual SVN. Visual SVN, I've set up a couple of repositories. One of the things that the challenges of dealing with database source control is the issue of data state, right? You know, as your data changes, you want to retain it because you might drop or lose data based off the schema changes. The way that the Redgate product works to address this is use of something called a migration script. But you have to use you have to set up a migration script repository separate from your database repository. It can't be in the same trunk line. So you can see here I've got an AdventureWorks and an AdventureWorks migration repository. So this repository will contain the databases, and this repository will contain here. Now I've already done some stuff in here before, so if you see that I click on something in here, like a store procedure, it's already got my store procedures in there as SQL files. You can, I can browse. Oh, it's going to ask me for my password, which I hope I remember. And I don't. Oh well. That's embarrassing. Oh well. I've got a repository out there of files that you could actually browse and look at if I could remember what the password was. But the idea is what source control is doing behind the scenes. I'm gonna link this database to that source control repository. And I'm gonna link this to the migration script. The development model, I think Steve touched on it a little bit in his session. The idea is that some groups have a single server and all your developers work off of one, and some groups have each individual developer has their own database. The latter choice is the best choice. However, the nice thing about this tool is that it supports either option, so that if you have a single shared database, you can do that. It does some things in the background in terms of trying to identify who made the change, which is kind of nice that you don't have to worry about so much as if you're running your own dedicated server. So we're going to set it up as a dedicated database. And I'm going to link it. And it'll take a little time, and there it's linking. And you see the little spinning icon. Well, first off, you notice that the icon changes inside of Object Explorer. And that tells me that this database is under source control. The little spinning icon, it's got a blue dot beside it, and what a blue dot means is that you've got changes to commit. The blue dots is basically, it's hierarchical, so if I had a bunch of tables and that was it, only the tables would be lit up, and I can click in and say, well, which tables are in there? So it says I need to commit some changes, so I'm going to type in a comment, committing change, and commit. So it committed. Now I can click on this table and actually right click on it and go to other source control tasks, or actually, sorry, hit view history. And for that individual table, I now can go back and see what the history of that table looked like. So if you've had a running list of changes, it's very easy to go back and see. So imagine a scenario where you as a DBA suddenly push a script from your developers, and the script from your developers made a change to 4 or 5 different store procedures, and one of them doesn't seem to be working anymore. If you had your production databases under source control, it's very easy for you now to go back and view the history of what those changes were and see if you can backtrack what the breaking change was, just in case it made it that far. Obviously, that can happen inside of a development environment, but you know, I'm on the production side of the house these days, so. If I set up another database over here, I'm going to go link database to source control. I'm sorry, I have to hit the right URL for that. And I don't know if I'm running over time or not, guys, so if I am, please tell me. So
We just hit the time point.
just hit time. Done. Okay. Let me finish this real quick and I'll show this this last little step. I'm linking the second database to the same source control repository. It's going to run through. And if I go and hit get latest, it looks at the database. It's comparing the database to the source control repository and tells me that I got a new table out there that I can push. I can right click and push this using SQL Compare. Talked about migration scripts, didn't get to it. Migration scripts allow you to do modifications to the data and store those. If you use a migration script inside of SQL Compare, it will automatically push those migration changes for you. It will use the migration script instead of doing its own comparison script as a first step and then push those things through. So we can, if anybody's interested, I can stick around and I can show you an example of that, or obviously there's a whole group of people in red shirts that know what they're talking about a lot better than I do, and they can step through it and show it as well. So thanks, guys. I really appreciate it. If I can answer any questions, there's all kinds of stuff we didn't talk about, and this is how you can reach me. And I think the slides are going to be available. So thanks. Appreciate it.